we've done the theory. We've done some practical things on Visual Studio. But now, we are finally going to start programming. I don't think we need an introduction. Let's just dive straight into the intro. So let's talk about the programming constructs. There are three main programming constructs and they each help to make up our code. The first one is called sequence, and that's what we'll be learning about today. The next one is called selection, and the final one is called iteration. By combining all three of these very simple concepts, you can make practically any program. So this video is about the very first one, sequence. Sequence is the very simple concept that code executes from top to bottom in sequence. So the line of code at the top will run first, and then the line at the bottom will run last. It will just go from top to bottom, just like how we read text. We go from the top to the bottom, and this is the absolute most fundamental part of building a program. Let's take a very simple example. Making toast. Programming is all about splitting it down into smaller steps. So, the first step is to get the bread. Next, we need to put the bread on the toaster. Then, we need to push it down into the toaster. And finally, we wait for it to pop back up. That's how you would make toast. And in code, you would put the first step at the top of the program, followed by the next step, then the step after that, and so on. Okay, enough talking. Let's open up Visual Studio and look at this. We'll create a new project. Remember, it has to be a console application. And let's just call it Sequence Tutorial. Okay, go ahead and pause and get this up. So, let's talk about where we're going to type our code, because it needs to go in a very specific place. Now, right now, it might not make a lot of sense why we have to put it there, but as we go on and on, it's going to begin to make more and more sense gradually. We have to put all of our code, for now, in between this opening curly brace here, and this closing curly brace here. So, if I type code here, then that's correct, because it has this curly brace before it, and it has this curly brace after it, putting it in between the two. So, as we write code, for now, we will always put it in between these curly braces. We won't put it outside of them, always keep it inside them. Okay, so you might notice up here that there's this line underneath the random letters I just typed. It's just like you see in Word where it underlines all of your spelling mistakes, except this isn't highlighting spelling mistakes, it's highlighting code mistakes. If I put my mouse over this line, where this red line is, it will actually tell me what's wrong. So it says that the name, and then all of the rubbish that I typed in, does not exist in the current context. And what it's basically saying is that the compiler has no idea what this means. I just typed in completely random letters. The compiler has no idea how to compile this rubbish into machine code. And if you actually look at what the error is saying, it's basically saying that it can't find anything called, and then what I typed in. Here's one tip that will help you quite a bit. At the bottom here, we do have an error list box, which shows you all of the errors that you have in your project. So that's a nice and quick way of seeing all of your errors. If you don't have an error list box, then if you recall what I said about bringing boxes back in the last video, just go up into View and choose Error List. However, you only get these red errors when it can't compile it, not if you made a mistake in the logic of the program. Let me explain what I mean by that. let's go back to our toast example. Let's say that we replaced one of these things, let's do step 2, with just random stuff that doesn't make any sense. As we know, the compiler is going to go along, compile step 1 fine, but then see step 2. And of course, it has no idea what it's supposed to do with this. It doesn't follow the rules of the programming language, so it just highlights it and tells us that it can't compile it. It won't even try, it will just give up and tell us to fix it. Okay, fine, so you'll see an error and you'll go and fix it and everything will be fine. But let's go back now. And let's say we accidentally mix up step 2 and step 3, so we end up putting step 3 first before step 2. So the compiler is going to go in and try and compile, and it's going to work. I mean, there's nothing wrong with this code. The compiler can understand it perfectly. So it will just compile it and you can run it. That's it. Done. But we know that there's a mistake here. Now, the compiler is completely oblivious. I mean, how is it supposed to know that we didn't want it in that order? So we're not going to get an error. And this is why programs have bugs. They're logic errors. Somebody got something slightly wrong somewhere, and so the program doesn't work. So they have to go through and look through the code to try and work out what they did wrong. So just remember that you won't get an error for everything. If you mess up the logic, you won't get an error. I mean, your code itself is fine. It's just not doing what you want it to do. Right, with all of that in our minds, let's write some code. Just one thing that I do want to point out is that spaces and lines and stuff like that don't matter. So if I write one line of code here and then leave a massive gap and have another line of code here, then that's exactly the same as just writing them next to each other like this. The only difference is that they look different to us. So when I occasionally leave a blank line in between lines of code, I'm doing that just to make the code a bit easier to read, by sort of separating each chunk of code into its own section. But it doesn't actually make any difference to the program once it's compiled. So, in this video, we'll write 2 different types of instruction. One instruction will put text on the screen. Pretty simple, right? And the other one will wait for the user, the person using the computer, to press enter. Yeah, I know it's not much to work with, but we have to start off with the simple stuff. So, at this stage, you don't need to understand why these lines of code work. We'll slowly learn that as we go along, but you just need to know that they do. So, the first instruction is going to go like this. Console, followed by a dot, and WriteLine. Then, we're going to put some brackets in. And they have to be the round brackets. Don't do these curly braces or square brackets like these. They have to be the rounded ones that are usually above 9 or 0. Like this. Now, notice one thing. It automatically put the closing bracket down for us. And this is something that Visual Studio does. And it's really helpful. It will automatically put an ending in place for us. Anyway, in between those brackets, we want to do a double quote. Not a single quote like this. This means something very different in C#. In some programming languages they mean the same thing, but in C#, they are different. So use these double quotes that are usually above the number 2 on the keyboard. Once again, it will probably automatically put down another double quote for us. And this is the ending of this quote, so it starts here and ends here. In between these quotes, let's just type in some random text like hello world. Now, this is one of the places where spaces do make a difference, because if I put a bunch of spaces in here like this, then it will literally write this as we see it right now onto the screen, which we don't really want. Okay, so let's finish this instruction off. At the end of the line, we put a semicolon. Now, this is something quite important. In C#, you have to end every line with a semicolon. It tells the compiler that that's the end of that instruction, move on. Okay, so let's look at that again. We've got this bit at the beginning here, which we'll understand better later, but it's essentially what type of instruction this is. So this is a WriteLine instruction, meaning it's writing text onto the screen, right? Then these brackets tell it what to write onto the screen. And this is the fundamental way we write C# code. We start by saying what we want it to do. And then, after that, in brackets, we give it more details, like what to write onto the screen. Okay, that's our first instruction. Now, if I run it, and I'll press F5, we'll get something a bit weird. If you look carefully, a window will just pop up for a second, and then just disappear instantly. So, what was that? Well, that was our program. But why did it just suddenly close like that? Well, if you think about it, it's really quite simple. So what happened is, it ran this line of code perfectly fine. There are no problems there. But then, it carried on. I mean, it doesn't just stop there, it's going to carry on running. So it goes down here a bit, and it reaches the end. What does it do when it reaches the end? It stops running. The second it reaches the end of the code, it stops running. And that's what happened. It happened so fast that we didn't see it, but it ran this line of code and then got to the bottom, and when it gets to the bottom, it just stops running. So we got a flicker of it, and then it got to the end and stopped instantly. So how do we stop that then? Well, this is where our next instruction comes in. Our next instruction tells the program to wait for the user to press the enter key. Let's write that out. So, straight after we write the text, we're going to type console, then a dot, followed by read line. Then, as always, we need brackets, but we're not going to put anything inside them because it doesn't need any more details. It just waits for the user to press enter. There are no more details to give it, so we'll just leave these empty. Then, as always, we put a semicolon on the end. And in C# we do that on almost every line. Some other programming languages don't do that, like VB for example. You don't put semicolons at the end of lines. It just uses the fact that you've gone onto a new line to know when the instruction ends. And in fact, if you try to put a semicolon in VB, it will give you an error because that's not valid VB. Right, now what will happen? Well, it will put the text hello world onto the screen, and then, after it's done that, it will wait for us to press enter before it moves on to the next line. And when we do press enter, it will move on from this line and go down to the end, so then the program will stop. Let's test it out. Let's start it up. Okay, so we have the text hello world here. And when we press enter, what should happen is, it will carry on running and eventually just reach the end. So let's press enter. And yep, it just reached the end and closed. Now it's time for you to do a little bit of thinking here. You don't have to copy this out. Let's say I have another WriteLine and ReadLine after these. Once again, remember, the empty line here doesn't matter. And I will just make this say something else. What do you think will happen? Think about it carefully. Remember, the code runs from the top to the bottom. Okay, so let's run this program and see what happens and maybe see if you were correct. Okay, I have the text hello world and nothing else. Right, let's press enter. Ah, look, there's my something else text. Okay, let's press enter again. Ah, now the program has closed. Did it do what you expected it to do? Well, let's actually watch it run. This is an awesome feature in Visual Studio and you will be using it a lot. Because C# is interpreted, we can actually pause the code and watch it run in front of our eyes. This is called debugging, and as the name suggests, it's literally designed to get rid of bugs. It's designed to help you find those logic errors by literally watching your code run. So, in order to debug our code, we need to add what are called breakpoints. And as the name kind of suggests, this is the point where it lets us watch our code. Let's choose the very first line of code and put a breakpoint on that. That means that our program will pause as soon as it gets to this line of code, and then we'll be in control of the execution. To add a breakpoint, all you need to do is go over here to the left and click on this little grey strip here. And you'll see that we get this big dark red thing, and this is our breakpoint. This means that when we get to this line of code, it will pause the code, and then we can manually make it move on. Let's start our program, and now, after a while, it will become yellow. This means that this is the line of code we are on right now. So the program has basically paused right here. Now, there are two ways we can make it move on. We can press continue, but then that will make it run normally, so it won't be in this special mode that lets us watch it run. It will just go back to running normally. What we want to do is move it on to the next line. And to do this, up here on the toolbar, you'll find a button called Step Into. This will make it move on to the next line. Now, I will be using F11, which is much quicker than going up here to click on this button, but once again, if you're on a laptop, that might be hard to do. So, I will hit F11, you can do it either way, and you can now see that the yellow box has moved onto the next line. So, we've ran this line now. It's done. We have run this line of code here, and we've now moved on to the next one. Hopefully you can see how this is useful for seeing what's happening. Let's go down to our taskbar and look at the program. And look, it's written the text out because we've run that code. The text has been put onto the screen. So, let's jump back into Visual Studio and do F11 again. And now, what's happened is it's jumped back into the program again. That's because the code is now waiting for us to press enter, because it was a console.readLine instruction. It's just waiting for us to press enter. Now, notice how, because it's waiting for us, these lines of code haven't been run yet. And that's why, when we ran the program, it said hello world, and then did nothing. It's because it's still on this line. The rest of it hasn't run yet. So, if I press enter now, then we can see that it now carries on running. Hopefully that makes sense, because that right there is what programming is all about. Thinking about how this code is going to run. It writes hello world, but then it gets to this line of code and basically gets stuck here until we press enter. And that's why it worked like it did. We saw hello world, and then when we pressed enter, it moved on from this line. So we can see now that we're on this line. So if we press F11 again, then it will move on to another console.readline. So that way, the program won't close because it will get stuck on this line waiting for us to press enter. And then, when it does carry on, since there's nothing left to run, the program will stop. That is what programming is all about. Now, let's remove this breakpoint. And to do that, just click on that little red thing again and it will go away. So, I'm actually going to give you a task here. I want you to recreate this very simple program. I start it up and it says first. Then, when I press enter, it says second. And then, when I press enter again, it says third. And then, if I press enter one more time, it closes the program. So, pause the video now and give that a go. If it's not working how you expected it to, put a breakpoint at the top line and go through the code line by line and watch what it does. Right, let's look at the answer. This is it right here. Remember, you don't need to put the gaps in between these lines, but I did, and I do kind of recommend you do it, just because it makes the code neater. So, to understand why this works the way it does, let's put a breakpoint in and watch it run. So, it says first, okay, fine. Let's press F11 to move along a bit. So now it's on this line. So if I try to press F11 again, it will get stuck on this line because it's waiting for us to press enter. So I'll press enter. And now it's moved on to the next line. This one writes second onto the screen. So let's just move on a bit. And it's stuck again. So let's press enter again. And now it's onto this line. I think you get the idea. So to just completely stop the program, let's just click on this big red stop button. And now the program's not running anymore. So I know that seems really pointless, but this is the foundation of programming. And as this series goes on, we'll just slowly start to add to this and learn how to do more things. And slowly, this very limited knowledge becomes extremely powerful, and we can start making some really cool stuff. So get ready, because in this series we're going to be building on this with things like data types, which are, well, types of data like numbers and text and things like that. Then we'll start looking at storing data in the RAM, which we do using what are called variables in C#. And then we'll go on to selection and iteration, and by the end of all of that, we will be able to build some very powerful programs, and we'll be able to go even further beyond that and start to create things called methods and all sorts. It's going to be amazing. We're going to create some really, I suppose you could say, advanced stuff. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed this video, and I hope that was pretty clear to follow. In fact, actually, speaking of following, if you're enjoying this series, you could follow me by subscribing to me. Bye.